December 19, 1944, 11 a.m. A drafty, dimly lit barracks in Verdun, France. The air inside the room is thick, not just with the gray haze of Lucky Strike cigarette smoke, but with the palpable scent of looming disaster. Outside, the Ardennes forest is a white hell of freezing fog and knee-deep snow. But inside, around a massive oak table covered in topographical maps, the atmosphere is even colder. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, stares at the red ink bleeding across the map. That red ink represents 3 German armies, 250,000 men smashing through the thin Allied line. The Ghost Front has turned into a slaughterhouse. You can hear the distant, low, rhythmic thud of heavy artillery, a sound that vibrates in the floorboards and in the marrow of the men gathered here. The bulge in the line is widening, threatening to reach the sea and cut the Allied forces in half. Eisenhower looks tired. His face is a roadmap of sleep deprivation. He looks at his commanders, Bradley, Devers, and the man with the ivory-handled revolvers strapped to his hips, George S. Patton, Jr. The situation, Eisenhower says, his voice raspy from too many cigarettes and too little hope, is a grave one. We must act as if this is the turning point of the war. Because it is. He leans over the map, his finger hovering over the besieged town of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne is trapped there, surrounded by panzers, running out of ammo, food, and time. If Bastogne falls, the road to Antwerp is open. The Western Front will shatter. "George," Eisenhower says, turning his gaze to Patton, "I need you to pivot. I need you to take your Third Army, currently facing east into the Saar, turn them 90 degrees north, and counterattack the German flank." "Can you do it?" The room goes silent. In the world of 1944 logistics, what Eisenhower is asking is considered a physical impossibility. Patton is currently engaged in a heavy offensive of his own. To do what Ike asks, Patton would have to disengage 6 divisions, over 130,000 vehicles and nearly 250,000 men, and move them over 100 miles through a blizzard on icy, narrow roads. Most generals would ask for weeks. The most optimistic would ask for 6 days. Patton doesn't blink. He doesn't look at his staff. He doesn't consult a notebook. He looks Eisenhower dead in the eye, the polished brass on his helmet gleaming in the low light. "I can attack with 3 divisions by the morning of the 21st, Patton says. A stunned silence follows. That's less than 48 hours. Omar Bradley, usually the calmest man in the room, scoffs audibly. "George, don't be fatuous. You can't rotate a whole army and move 100 miles in 2 days in this weather. You'll have a traffic jam that stretches to Paris." But Patton isn't looking at Bradley. He is looking at the man who has spent the last 2 years protecting him from his own mouth. The man who has kept him in command despite the slapping incidents in Sicily and the constant diplomatic nightmares Patton creates. Eisenhower knows Patton's reputation for theatrics. He knows George loves the limelight. But he also knows that beneath the bravado and the shiny boots is a man who understands the tempo of war better than any living soul. "Every time I get into trouble," Eisenhower would later remark, "I have to call on George. You can feel the chill into another fell on George." Tension in the room, the skepticism of the intellectual generals versus the raw, predatory confidence of the cavalrymen. Patton's jaw is set. He knows his reputation is on the line. More importantly, he knows the lives of the battered bastards of Bastogne are ticking away with every second of hesitation. "I'm not being fatuous, Brad," Patton snaps, his voice high-pitched but commanding. "I've already started the movement." Eisenhower leans back, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. He is gambling the entire Western Front on one man's audacity. He knows that if Patton fails, the Allied alliance might crumble under the weight of a prolonged bloody stalemate. If Patton fails, Eisenhower's own career is over. But if Patton is right, If he can actually pull off a maneuver that defies every law of military logistics? Eisenhower nods slowly. General Patton, you have your orders. May God have mercy on the Germans, because I know you won't. As Patton turns to leave, his spurs jingling against the floor, the other generals exchange worried glances. They think he's lying. They think he's grandstanding. What they don't know is that Patton has already spent the last 72 hours preparing for a phone call he hadn't even received yet. He had already sensed the German move before the scouts did. He was already moving. But the real test wasn't the decision in the room. The real test was the black ice, the Tiger tanks waiting in the woods, and a ticking clock that was currently screaming toward zero. December 20th, 1944, 3 a.m., a frozen roadside outside Luxembourg City. Imagine the sound of 100,000 engines screaming against the cold. It's a low, guttural roar that vibrates through the frozen mud and into the solace of your boots. Through the swirling sleet, you see them, a ghost army of steel. M4 Sherman tanks, their olive drab paint caked in white rime. CCKW Deuce and a half trucks packed with shivering infantry. And M8 Greyhounds skidding on black ice. This isn't a retreat. It's a 90-degree pivot, the most audacious logistical feat in the history of modern warfare. Image: archival footage of Third Army vehicles moving through heavy snow and ice. While the rest of the Allied command was still reeling from the shock of the German offensive, Patton's staff at Lucky Forward, his mobile headquarters, had been working in a fever dream. Patton hadn't lied to Eisenhower. He had simply seen the move coming before anyone else. Days earlier, he had ordered his staff to prepare 3 separate contingency plans. When Ike gave the word, Patton didn't have to think. He just said, "Execute Plan 4." But planning on paper is one thing. Moving 250,000 men through a blizzard is another. Keep 'em moving. The MPs shout, their flashlights cutting weak yellow arcs through the blinding snow. They stand at every crossroads, frozen statues directing a river of iron that never stops. Drivers are slapping their own faces to stay awake, their eyes bloodshot from staring into the white void. If a truck breaks down, it isn't repaired, it's pushed into the ditch. There is no time for mechanical failure. There is only the north. The temperature has plummeted to near zero. In the open-topped half-tracks, soldiers are huddled together, trying to steal warmth from the man next to them. Their breath comes out in thick plumes of steam. For many of these men, the old man Patton is a source of both terror and inspiration. They call him Old Blood and Guts, and the joke in the ranks is his guts, our blood. But as they see his open-topped command car racing past the columns, Patton standing tall in the freezing wind like a predatory bird, the resentment shifts into something else. It shifts into a grim shared purpose. The man is a madman, a sergeant might mutter, but he's our madman. Back in his headquarters at Versailles, Eisenhower is receiving reports every hour. The news from the front is catastrophic. The 106th Infantry Division has been virtually annihilated. The 7th Armored is fighting for its life at St. Vith. And in Bastogne, the 101st is being squeezed tighter and tighter by 5 German divisions. Eisenhower stares at the clock. He is a man who weighs every decision on a scale of human lives. He knows that by ordering Patton to Bastogne, he has effectively abandoned the Saar offensive he spent months planning. He has stripped his center thin. He has bet the house on a man most of the U.S. press and half of Congress want fired. But then, a telegram arrives. It's from Patton's G3, his operations officer. It's not a request for more fuel. It's not a complaint about the weather. It's a position report. In less than 24 hours, Patton's lead elements have covered nearly 80 miles. They are already engaging the southern flank of the German Bulge. The impossible pivot was happening. However, as the Third Army's lead tanks hit the German lines, they don't find a retreating enemy. They find the cream of the Wehrmacht, the 5th Panzer Army. The Germans have realized what Patton is trying to do. They know that if they can stop him here in the narrow valleys leading to Bastogne, the 101st Airborne will be slaughtered and the Allied line will stay broken. The snow begins to fall even harder, obscuring the horizon. The Allied Air Force, the one advantage Eisenhower counts on, is grounded. The Jabos, the P-47 Thunderbolts that usually clear the path for Patton, are useless in this soup. Patton stands in a field, looking at the leaden gray sky. He isn't a man given to quiet reflection, but even he can feel the weight of the moment. The momentum is stalling. The tanks are sliding off the roads. The German 88mm guns are starting to find their range, turning the beautiful white forest into a graveyard of burning metal and splintered pine. He needs a miracle. Not a logistical one this time, but a literal one. He turns to his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill. His eyes are hard, but there's a flicker of something desperate behind them. "Chaplain," Patton barks, "I want a prayer. A prayer for good weather. I'm tired of these Germans using the clouds to hide from us." O'Neill looks at the general, stunned. "Sir, it's a bit unusual to pray for the weather so we can kill people." Patton's response would become legend, a moment that defined the bridge between the man's ego and his absolute commitment to victory. But as the prayer is being typed out, the German panzers are launching a massive counterthrust of their own, aimed directly at the heart of Patton's relief column. The relief of Bastogne wasn't just behind schedule. It was about to become a massacre. December 23, 1944, 8:30 a.m. Outside Arlon, Belgium. The world is a silent, suffocating white. For days, the Allied air forces, the greatest armada the world has ever seen, have been shackled to the ground. Thousands of planes sit idle on runways in England and France, their engines cold, their pilots staring helplessly at a ceiling of gray soup that won't break. On the ground, Patton's Third Army is bleeding. They are slamming into the German flank, but without air support, it's a meat grinder. The panzers are hidden in the tree lines, and every crossroad is a death trap. Image: close-up of a soldier's frozen face. Then a wide shot of a valley choked with smoke. Then it happens. It starts as a faint, pale yellow glow in the east. You see the clouds begin to fray at the edges, like an old wool blanket being pulled apart. A wind kicks up, sharp and biting, but it's doing something miraculous. It's pushing the fog out of the valleys. A single patch of blue appears, a hole in the sky no bigger than a man's hand. Minutes later, the hole widens. The sun, haven't seen in over a week, bursts through with a blinding, crystalline intensity that turns the snow-covered Ardennes into a landscape of crushed diamonds. And then comes the sound. It starts as a low hum on the horizon, growing into a thunderous, bone-shaking roar. From the south, hundreds, then thousands of silhouettes appear against the blue, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, C-47 transport planes. The Jabos are back. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from the frozen men in the foxholes. Above them, the sky is suddenly filled with the silver streaks of contrails. The American pilots, fueled by days of bottled-up frustration, dive like hawks. They find the German supply columns, thousands of trucks and fuel tankers trapped on the narrow mountain roads, and turn them into a 60-mile-long funeral pyre. Patton stands outside his command trailer, squinting into the sun. He doesn't look surprised. He looks like a man who just won a hand of high-stakes poker. He turns to his aide. "Get me that chaplain," Patton says, a predatory grin on his face. "I want to give him a medal." He's got a direct wire to the headman. Image: the famous Patton prayer card distributed to the troops. But while the weather has broken, the ground is still a nightmare. The Germans know Bastogne is the key. They have reinforced the perimeter with the 5th Parachute Division and the 12th SS Panzer. They are desperate. They know that if Patton breaks through, The bulge becomes a trap for the German army. The 4th Armored Division, Patton's point of the spear, is leading the charge. They are fighting for every yard. The tanks are sliding on roads that are nothing more than sheets of ice. When a tank is hit, the crew has seconds to scramble out before the steel becomes a furnace. The smell of cordite and scorched oil hangs heavy in the frozen air. At SHAEF headquarters, Eisenhower is watching the pins move on the map. He is under immense pressure from the British, particularly Field Marshal Montgomery, who is calling for a more cautious approach. Montgomery wants to retreat, regroup, and wait for spring. Eisenhower looks at the reports coming from Patton's sector. They are messy. They are violent. Patton is bypassing pockets of resistance, leaving his rear exposed and driving his men until they collapse from exhaustion. It's a move that defies every textbook safe strategy. "He's a wild man, Ike," one staff officer warns. "He's going to get an entire corps cut off." Eisenhower stares at the map of Bastogne. He knows that the 101st Airborne is down to its last boxes of ammunition. Surgeons are operating in cellars using flashlights and no anesthesia. If Ike listens to the safe advice, Bastogne will fall tonight. "George is the only one who's actually attacking," Eisenhower says firmly. "Everyone else is just trying to survive. Let him run." On the afternoon of December 26th, a tank commander named Lt. Charles Boggess, leading a small task force from the 4th Armored, rounds a bend near the village of Eisenhower. Through his periscope, he sees a line of foxholes. Figures in tattered, white camouflage jumpsuits rise from the snow. They aren't Germans. They are the paratroopers of the 101st. The siege of Bastogne is broken. The impossible pivot has succeeded. Patton has done what every other general said was a fantasy. But as the news reaches the world, the celebration is short-lived. Patton hasn't just saved Bastogne, he has humiliated the German High Command. And in their rage, Hitler's generals order a final, suicidal counterstrike. They aren't aiming for Bastogne anymore. They are aiming directly for Patton himself. As the sun sets on the 26th, the sky turns a bruised purple. The victory feels hollow as a new, darker report reaches Patton's desk. The Germans haven't retreated. They've vanished into the woods, preparing for a blow that will make the last 10 days look like a skirmish. And this time, Patton is out of miracles. January 1st, 1945, 4 a.m., near Houffalize, Belgium. The relief of Bastogne was a headline, a flash of glory for the newsreels back home. But for the men on the ground, the bulge was still a jagged, bleeding wound in the Allied line. The Germans hadn't vanished. Instead, they had dug in like ticks into the frozen earth of the Ardennes. It's a massive offensive to the south, intended to draw Patton's attention away from the bulge and collapse the entire Western Front. Image, tactical map, showing the German secondary offensive Nordwind and the Allied response. You can feel the shift in the wind. The air is no longer just cold, it's violent. The Germans are using Nebelwerfer's rocket launchers the Guys call screaming mimes. The sound is a soul-shredding shriek that tears through the forest, followed by explosions that turn ancient oaks into lethal wooden shrapnel. Patton is at his most manic. He is sleeping 4 hours a night. He is constantly on the move, his jeep bouncing over cratered roads, his face caked in a mask of frozen mud and gray dust. He knows the window of opportunity is closing. If he doesn't pinch off the base of the German penetration now, the Wehrmacht will slip away to fight another day behind the safety of the Siegfried Line. Attack, attack, and attack again. Patton bellows at his corps commanders. He isn't interested in consolidating gains. To Patton, a static army is a dying army. But back at the Supreme Headquarters in Versailles, a different kind of war is being fought. A political war. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery has just held a press conference. In a move of staggering arrogance, he implies that he, the British commander, was the one who saved the Americans from their own incompetence. The American generals are livid. Bradley is ready to resign. Publicly, the Allied coalition is cracking at the very moment it needs to be strongest. Eisenhower is caught in the middle of a firestorm. He has the British demanding more control. He has the American press demanding Patton's head for his recklessness. And he has the War Department in Washington asking why the war isn't over yet. Ike sits in his office, the walls covered in maps that show the staggering cost of the last 3 weeks. Over 80,000 American casualties. He picks up a report from the Third Army. While other sectors are reporting measured withdrawals or holding actions, Patton's reports are different. They are filled with numbers. Miles gained, prisoners taken, Tiger tanks destroyed. Patton isn't playing the political game. He is simply winning the physical one. Image. Close-up of Eisenhower's hand hovering over a map of the Rhine River. George is a problem, Eisenhower tells his chief of staff, Bettlesmith. He's a loudmouth, he's a prima donna, and he's a headache for the diplomats. He pauses, looking at the red lines of Patton's advance. But he is the only one who doesn't look at the map and see a disaster. He sees an opportunity. Without George, we'd still be sitting in the snow, waiting for the Germans to decide when they're finished with us. Eisenhower makes a choice that will define the end of the war. He ignores the British protests. He ignores the calls for Patton's removal. Instead, he gives Patton more. More fuel, more divisions, more freedom. He realizes that while he, Eisenhower, is the architect of the war, Patton is the sledgehammer. And the German wall is finally starting to crack. But as Patton drives his men harder than ever, the cost of his audacity begins to mount. The hospitals are overflowing with men suffering from trench foot and frostbite. The tanks are running on fumes. Eisenhower makes a choice that will define the end of the war. He ignores the British protests. He ignores the calls for Patton's removal. Instead, he gives Patton more fuel, more divisions, more freedom. He realizes that while he, Eisenhower, is the architect of the war, Patton is the sledgehammer, and the German wall is finally starting to crack. But as Patton drives his men harder than ever, the cost of his audacity begins to mount. The hospitals are overflowing with men suffering from trench foot and frostbite. The tanks are running on fumes. And then, a message arrives from the front that halts Patton's relentless drive. It's not a German counterattack. It's something far more chilling. The Lyd elements of the 4th Armored have discovered something in the woods, something that changes the nature of the war from a strategic struggle into a moral crusade. Patton, the man of blood and guts, is about to come face to face with a reality that even his bravado cannot mask. The greatest victory of his career is about to be shadowed by the darkest discovery of the 20th century. April 12, 1945, 11:30 a.m. Outside the gates of Ohrdruf, Germany. The war is dying, but the air doesn't feel like victory. It feels like ash. General George S. Patton, Jr., a man who has spent his entire life studying the glory of the battlefield, stands at the edge of a shallow pit. Beside him are Eisenhower and Bradley. For the first time in the entire campaign, the sound of artillery is replaced by a silence so heavy it feels like a physical weight on your chest. This is Ohrdruf, the first Nazi concentration camp liberated by American forces. The old blood and guts persona, the ivory-handled revolvers, the polished boots, it all seemed grotesque and small in the face of what lies before them. You can see it in Patton's eyes. The predatory fire has been replaced by a hollow, haunted stare. The smell hits you first. It isn't the metallic tang of cordite or the earthy scent of churned mud. It is the sweet, cloying, unmistakable stench of industrial-scale death. Patton, the man who laughed in the face of German 88s, turns away. He walks behind a barracks and is physically ill. Eisenhower, however, does not turn away. His face is a mask of cold, white fury. He turns to the cameramen and the Signal Corps officers. "Get it all on film," Eisenhower commands, his voice trembling with a rage that is quieter and more terrifying than any shout. "Document everything. Every body, every bone, every witness. Because somewhere down the road of history, some bastard will say this never happened." In this moment, the relationship between Eisenhower and Patton undergoes its final transformation. For years, Eisenhower had viewed Patton as a problem child, a brilliant but volatile weapon that had to be carefully aimed and constantly restrained. He had backed Patton after the slapping incidents in Sicily because he needed a fighter. He had backed him during the Bulge because he needed a miracle. But as they walk through the gates of Ohrdruf, Eisenhower realizes the true value of George Patton. He realizes that the audacity he had so often tried to temper was the only thing that could have ended this nightmare a day, a week, or a month sooner. Every time Patton defied in order to slow down or consolidate, he wasn't just seeking glory. He was stopping the clock on an assembly line of murder. "George," Eisenhower says as they prepare to leave the camp, his hand resting briefly on Patton's shoulder. It is a rare moment of genuine intimacy between the two men. "The world will never know how much we owe you for moving as fast as you did." The Third Army doesn't slow down. They cross the Rhine. They race into the heart of the Reich. They are no longer just fighting for territory or strategic bulges. They are fighting to stop the smoke from rising from the chimneys. Patton's pace becomes even more frenetic. He is driving his tanks 50-60 miles a day. He is bypassing entire German divisions, leaving them for the following infantry to mop up. He is obsessed. He knows that every hour a panzer remains in the field is another hour the camps remain open. The skepticism of the intellectual generals has vanished. No one is calling Patton fatuous anymore. They are simply trying to keep up with him. But as the Third Army nears the Czech border and the final collapse of the Nazi regime becomes a certainty, the tension between the two friends returns, this time with a new and dangerous flavor. The war against Hitler is ending, but Patton's eyes are already fixed on the next shadow looming over Europe. He sees the Soviet allies not as partners, but as the next great enemy. He begins to speak openly about keeping the tanks gassed up to drive straight to Moscow. Eisenhower, now the supreme diplomat of a fragile new world order, finds himself in the most difficult position of his career. He has just won the greatest war in history using his most powerful weapon, but now he has to figure out how to put that weapon back in the holster before it starts a third world war. The final confrontation between the two men isn't fought with tanks or maps. It is fought with a single devastating order that would change the course of the post-war world. May 8, 1945, 9 a.m., a villa in Bad Nauheim, Germany. The guns have fallen silent across Europe. VE Day. In London and New York, the streets are flooded with people dancing, weeping, and kissing strangers. But in the heart of occupied Germany, inside a requisition manor house, General George S. Patton Jr. is pacing like a caged tiger. Image. Archival footage of VE Day celebrations contrasted with Patton's grim expression. You can see it in the way he handles his crop, the way he stares out the window at the Soviet sentries just across the demarcation line. For Patton, the silence isn't peace, it's a countdown. He looks at the Red Army battle-hardened, brutal, and parked in the middle of Europe, and he sees the next great war. "We're authorized to stop here," his staff reminds him. "We're authorized to lose the peace, you mean?" Patton snaps back. He had begged Eisenhower to let him take Berlin. He had begged to take Prague. Each time, Eisenhower, the diplomat general, had said no. The relationship that saved the Western Front is now fraying under the weight of a new world order. Eisenhower is now the military governor of the U.S. occupation zone. He is dealing with starving populations, displaced millions, and the delicate ego of Joseph Stalin. He needs a builder, a bureaucrat, a healer. Patton, however, is a destroyer. He begins making public statements that send shockwaves through Washington. He compares the Nazi Party to Republicans and Democrats. He advocates for rearming the remaining German Wehrmacht to help the Allies push the Soviets back to their borders. To the press, he is a loose cannon. To the State Department, he is a liability that could ignite World War III. Eisenhower is forced to do what he had avoided through the darkest days of the Bulge and the campaigns of North Africa. He has to take away George's army. In October 1945, Eisenhower relieves Patton of command of his beloved Third Army, transferring him to the Paper Army, the 5th Tenth, a unit responsible for writing the official history of the war. It is a desk job. For a man who lived for the roar of the M4 Sherman, it is a death sentence. Image: a solitary Patton sitting at a desk, looking aged and deflated. "George," Eisenhower told him during their final tense meeting, "you're a great soldier, but you're a terrible politician. And the time for soldiers is over." But why did Eisenhower back him for so long? Why did he protect a man who caused him more gray hairs than the entire German high command? As the dust of history settled, the truth became clear. Eisenhower knew that every great endeavor requires a terrible man. Ike was the grand architect, the man who held the British, the French, and the Americans together with a smile and a handshake. But a smile doesn't break a panzer division. A handshake doesn't pivot an entire army in a blizzard. Eisenhower backed Patton because Patton was the only officer in the Allied arsenal who possessed the will to win in its purest, most violent form. He was the spearhead that allowed Eisenhower to remain the diplomat. Ike could be the good cop because the Germans were terrified of the bad cop with the ivory revolvers. December 21, 1945, 5:50 p.m. A military hospital in Heidelberg. Exactly 1 year to the day after Patton promised Eisenhower he would save Bastogne, the general is dying. Not from a German bullet, but from a freak low-speed car accident that left him paralyzed from the neck down. As he lies in the hospital bed, the man who lived for blood and guts whispers his final irony. "This is a hell of a way for a soldier to die." When the news reached Eisenhower, now back in the States, he reportedly sat in silence for a long time. He had lost his most difficult friend, his most brilliant subordinate, and his most effective weapon. Image: a wide shot of the American cemetery in Ham, Luxembourg. Today, if you visit the American cemetery in Luxembourg, you will see thousands of white crosses arranged in perfect, symmetrical arcs. But one grave stands at the head of them all, looking out over the men he led. It is the grave of George S. Patton, Jr. He was buried there at his family's request among his soldiers. He remains there as a testament to a partnership that changed the world, a partnership between a man who knew how to lead and a man who knew how to win. Eisenhower gave Patton the stage, and Patton gave Eisenhower the victory. Without the audacity of the one, the wisdom of the other might have been buried in the snows of the Ardennes.